Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you. We have a party next door, which I hope isn't going to be too distracting for you. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to go on for, but welcome to the Temenos Academy, especially to those who perhaps are here for the first time. Before we hear lectures at Temenos, we always do the same thing, which was instigated by the founder of Temenos, Kathleen Rain, and that is to light a candle, which Kathleen always felt was symbolic of what Temenos strives to do, to keep the light burning in the darkness. And then, if it's possible, with the party going on next door, what we also do is just still our minds for a minute. I don't know about you, but I've had a particularly stressful journey here, so I could certainly do with standing or sitting in silence for just a minute before I introduce our speaker this evening. So if it is possible just to still your mind and banish all thought for a minute, I'm sure we'll be more receptive to what Andrew has to tell us. Well, it's a great pleasure to introduce to you Andrew Wolpert this evening. This isn't the first time that he's spoken to Temenos, and if you have been to any of his previous lectures, then I'm sure you know you're in for quite a treat this evening. It's going to be, I'm sure, an interesting hour. I think we're all rather fascinated by Leonardo. He is, for me, up there with Plato and Shakespeare, and for that matter, Johann Sebastian Bach, in the sense that he's an individual with clearly a lightning intelligence and a profound insight into the human condition, but who, of course, because of the distance between him and us, is frustratingly enigmatic. And I have often wondered myself what he would make of his reputation today. In fact, I was only reading about him recently, and it suddenly occurred to me that he might even not have thought of himself even as a painter, but more likely maybe an engineer or somebody who was most fascinated in understanding the truth about nature, how it fits together, not just its mechanical aspect either. So I'm certainly intrigued to hear what Andrew has to say, not just about the circumstances of this, well, we call it an unfinished painting, the Adoration of the Magi, but also, I suspect, what this might tell us about Leonardo, his intention, the sources of the symbolism that he uses, and that he was drawing on as that perception of the truth of things was developing in that, well, rather messy, febrile period of Italian history, which we rather neatly call the Renaissance. So without further ado, would you please welcome Andrew Wolpert?
Good evening. Ian, you have allowed me by introducing me and mentioning Plato and Shakespeare and Bach. You've allowed me to mention them also later this evening, certainly Bach and Shakespeare. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to contribute to the work here of Temenos. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you. I've given you a handout, and it has a list of almost all the pictures I'm going to show you. And it also has reference to two articles that I found particularly helpful in trying to understand the symbolism of the architecture generally in the adoration of Magi pictures, but also particularly what Leonardo does in this particular work. And at the very end, there's a website, Alta Definizione, which allows you to click onto the picture and zoom in on any detail to a much greater magnification than you could ever achieve, even by going and standing in front of the picture itself in Uffizi. And I must say, I find this website very helpful. Of course, it's growing, and there are more and more pictures on their repertoire. Well, 4 years ago, this picture completed a cleaning restoration process. It's painted on 10 vertically glued together planks of poplar wood. And Leonardo used a calcium sulfate and a gesso glue as a basis for that. And it was commissioned in 1481 for the monastery of San Donato in Scopeto, which is in Florence. But after having completed this design, he decided to move to Milan, and he left the picture unfinished. And the monks there then asked Lippi to provide them with a picture of the same theme. And it hangs now in the Uffizi in the same room as the Leonardo that it replaced. So the cleaning was begun in 2012 and finished in 2015. And it was a process of removing all the dirt, the oil, the smoke, and the varnish. And it was completed in 2017. And if you're familiar with the picture before it underwent this restoration, it's an extraordinary metamorphosis. I've resisted the temptation this evening of showing you a before and after slide. I think we should be glad that we can see it in this cleaned way. All sorts of things have become visible as a result of that cleaning. The three horse heads there show a particularly interesting aspect of this. It means that Leonardo, I think they're called pentimenti in Italian, where the artist paints something and then repents and wants to do it differently. And it shows that in the general arrangement of the composition, Leonardo was working spontaneously, and he may have had ideas, certainly, but he felt happy to change them and to embroider and do things a little differently. In every respect except the architecture, there are drawings in the Uffizi and in the Louvre which show how he experimented in advance very carefully with how the architecture should be. And it's a fascinating aspect of these adoration of the Magi pictures. This theme always attracts a ruin. It's almost as if the artists were not that interested in reading the gospel accounts. In the Luke gospel, the shepherds come to a manger, to a stable, and the child is in a manger. In the Matthew gospel, which describes the arrival of the Magi, actually Mary and Joseph are described as being in a house. And just by the way, it's very interesting that neither of these gospel accounts contains any references to oxes and asses. So quite where they came into the iconography, I don't know, but Leonardo does not indulge that. In 2002, an ambitious project, a multispectral diagnostic imaging process was begun by more of a technician than an art historian, though of course he has become one now, and that is Maurizio Serracini. And he was interested in looking below the visible surface at what there might be underneath. And his conclusions were very disturbing to the art world that had become quite entrenched in the idea that this is certainly Leonardo and everything that we see here is Leonardo. His analysis revealed that about up to 50 or 100 years after Leonardo had finished this, another layer, another wash was added and other pencil marks were added. And he felt able to say this quite securely because the shifting in the arrangement of the planks allowed a subsequent liquid to enter in between the planks. So he was convinced that what they then found between the planks cannot have been Leonardo's time, because it wouldn't have, this seeping into the gap would not have been a possibility in the original arrangement of the whole background. But Bellucci and Professor Bellucci and the experts at the Opificio delle Pietre Dure decided to ignore what Serracini had come up with, because it was quite inconvenient to the rather entrenched positions that they had already made for themselves about how much of this is originally, of course, Leonardo. He leads us, his research leads us to understand that there was even more turbulence and activity and tumultuous crowds than already is there for us. And one of the more interesting conclusions that he comes to is that actually the architecture here is not just a ruin, but it's also a building site. And if you can find, if you have access to the drawings, particularly in the Louvre and also in the Uffizi, you will see there's a lot of evidence in the initial detail that there were people working, constructing and building wood, carrying piles of things that only make sense in terms of a construction site. So this adds a new dimension to the whole significance of what is it, why there should be an architectural background that is traditionally a ruin. I mean, it's not difficult to understand the significance of a ruin into this ruined world, and it's not the ruined world of nature, it's the ruined world of the human achievement in the architecture. Into this ruined world comes a child that brings the promise of a new future. So I think that is a fairly clear way of trying to understand the significance. But if Leonardo departed from that or added to that by showing an architecture that is also a building site where something is being constructed, it adds quite a dimension to all of that. So this is, I'm so glad to find this on the internet. This is a picture of what Serracini found underneath the picture as we see it today. And this is one of the things that leads him to suppose that someone is actually in the process of constructing. But the restoration chose to ignore his findings, and that part of the picture now is like this, and we cannot see that little fellow, whatever it may be that he was doing. Another detail that his research revealed, and I'm sorry, this is not the best slide, but it may do briefly. Another detail that he commented on was the right foot of the Madonna. And he came to the conclusion that this clumsily drawn right foot cannot possibly be Leonardo. If you go to the National Gallery and you look at the Burlington House cartoon, which is around which there are no doubts at all about the authorship of Leonardo, and you look at the detail of the foot there, you see that it's actually not that different. So I'm not entirely persuaded by all the examples that Serracini adduces for his contention, but it certainly is interesting that his inconveniently finding a lot of stuff that threatens the accepted view has been ignored. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. These these technical details and these historical details are, of course, interesting, but it's not my main theme this evening. My main theme this evening is to concentrate on the composition, the iconography, particularly the way the crowd is represented, the direction of whatever movement there is, and then particularly the dynamic between the old man and the child, the first of the Magi that kneels down in front of him. And I think the significance of these compositional details are not affected by the truth or otherwise of Seracini's contention or the position that the restorers took. The composition is clearly Leonardo's. There's no quarrel about that. Perhaps it's important to say also that Epiphany, the 6th of January, was a very important date in the Florentine calendar. If we go back to 1164, Emperor Frederick was responsible for taking the relics of the Magi from a church in Milan to the cathedral in Cologne, where they are today. And although Milan and Florence are not very far away today, they were, of course, politically very separate entities in those days. Nevertheless, there was a kind of feeling, I think, that in Florence, that, all right, Italy has been deprived of the relics of the Magi, and so all the more intensely will we celebrate the Magi on the 6th of January. And the 6th of January is, of course, also the feast of the baptism. And John the Baptist is the patron saint of Florence. So it all comes together on June the 24th, which is St. John's Day, the birth of John the Baptist, and on January the 6th, which is the commemoration of the baptism, and also the day on which, out of a certain tradition, the adoration of the Magi, the coming of the kings, is celebrated in the calendar then as well. For a long time, I struggled with this, and I wasn't quite sure. But it seems more clear for me now. The word epiphany is Greek, and it means the manifestation. Something becomes visible. And it's normally thought that the Magi arrive and the child becomes visible to them. But I don't find that at all convincing. I'm much more persuaded by the fact that one of the very few moments where all 4 Gospels narrate an event in the life of Jesus of Nazareth, almost identically, is this moment of the baptism. And you'll remember from all 4 Gospels that the Trinity is manifested. The voice of the Father God who says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." The dove as a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. And into the human being, Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ incarnates. So it's a manifestation of the Trinity. And I think that's what the word epiphany, I am inclined to understand the word epiphany as referring to this event of the baptism on the 6th of January. It might also not be irrelevant just briefly to contrast the 2 stories around the birth in Bethlehem. So in the Luke Gospel, the shepherds are told by a choir of angels to go to the place where they can pay their homage to the child. And you'll remember, the shepherds are looking after their sheep. You imagine that they have an intimate connection with the earth, with the forces of the earth, with the expectation within the earth of what is coming. And they're coming to the stable in Bethlehem. Some of the medieval nativity dramas portray this more, what should we say, more explicitly than the gospel. But can you imagine that these shepherds come in something of a sort of humble, unsure way, and they're overwhelmed by what they then see. And there's just one line then in the Luke Gospel where it says, "And having seen this, they felt it important to tell everybody, to go out and speak about it to the world." And there's such a contrast between the imagination of their rather diffident arrival and their confident intention now to speak about what they have seen. And of course, the contrast is enormous, because in the Matthew Gospel, where the Magi are described, it couldn't be more opposite. So the Magi have a capacity to read the wisdom of the stars. The astronomy becomes astrology for them. And so also in the night, but not asleep, in full day consciousness, Magi are able to look at the starry heavens and discern the meaning of this particular star. And so out of an accumulated wisdom of the past, you feel the shepherds are so present. They're there at the moment. There is a nowness about the shepherds. And around the Magi, there is a sense that they bring with them an accumulated wisdom from the past, the ability to read the stars and to know what it means. And they come to Bethlehem, but first they go to Jerusalem and they pay their respects to the local king, who finds out where they should go and says, please come and tell me, because I too want to pay my respects to this child. And they then go to Bethlehem and they find Mary and Joseph and Jesus in a house. And I think it's also iconographically very interesting. In every nativity picture where the shepherds arrive, the child is either on the ground or in the crib, in the manger. And almost, I mean, I've never seen a picture of the adoration of the Magi where the child is not seated on his mother's knee. And then you have this extraordinary thing of a king kneels before a child. They're called Magi. We think of them as the kings. They kneel. And look how they kneel before a child who is, will you forgive me if I say, enthroned on the lap of his mother. So it's a king in deference to another kingly being whose throne is actually the mother through whom he has come to birth. And then the kings are warned in a dream, don't go back via Jerusalem, go home quietly another way. Just the opposite of the shepherds. Can you imagine these kings in their gorgeous gowns with their processions and all the retinue that they would have come with? Must have attracted enormous attention. Their arrival must have been magnificent. And their departure is quiet. So it's a wonderful, in the Gospels themselves, we're treated to this very clear description of a kind of a turning point of time where things change. Well, you probably know this. This is in Ravenna. It's in Santa Apollinare Nuovo, and it's not the adoration of the Magi, but I wanted to show this because it's so beautiful how the urgency of these three in the bearing of their gifts is depicted. And in the baptistry in Florence, the particular moment when the three Magi arrive at the house is not remarkable compositionally or iconographically. There's nobody else there. There's no sense of a crowd or movement at all. But I just love this depiction of how they then go away in another way, quietly, not on the horses that they probably arrived at. And look at the sea creatures that are shown here in the picture. Well, before I embark on an exploration with you of how the composition and the iconography in Leonardo's adoration is so different from many others, I would like to run through a sequence of pictures that Leonardo almost certainly would himself have known. It's very often the business of art historians to show how what one artist did rests on or derives from in some way what they may have seen earlier artists or contemporaries doing. And you will not be surprised if we discover that actually precisely with Leonardo, that Leonardo's iconography and compositions don't admit to that kind of analysis. In fact, quite the contrary. Also with the Last Supper and with the Annunciation, these are pictures in which Leonardo develops a composition that cannot be derived in the sense of its most perfect or the sense of its most interesting aspects, cannot be derived from what earlier artists did. I don't want to say he deliberately doesn't do what people have done before. That would be to cheapen it. He actually has something different to say. Well, I'd like to run through them fairly quickly, just so that you get a sense of the background and what else was happening in Florence around that time. Please pay particular attention to the direction, the crowd, how the crowd is depicted, where the architecture occurs, and what the dynamic is between the child and probably the first of the Magi who kneels down in front. The list you have is the list of these pictures in that order. So I don't feel I need to say that this is Giotto. It's obvious, and I'm sure you know it. But notice, interestingly, how the third figure is so unmistakably feminine. And in some cases, unmistakably black. Probably the most gorgeous one of all, Gentile da Fabriano. Can you see in the top left little sort of arch, the lunette, can you see the three Magi are standing on a hill and seeing a star? In the middle arch, they're riding with their great pomp and retinue into Jerusalem. And in the third one, they're now riding into Bethlehem. And then just look at that amazing humor, that swing of action, how that throng of people crowds in, and it comes to a high point where the oldest individual in the picture greets the youngest individual in the picture. I mean, Gentile must have had a sense of humor. Look how the two servants or the ladies in waiting behind, whoever they are, they're having a peek into the present that has been already given. We will come back to this picture. You can see more detail here. Again, the third, yes, please. Rupert, is that possible? Is that better? Oh, good. Well, thank you for asking. Again, the third individual there is not so unmistakably, but nevertheless very suggestively a woman. This is in the monastery of San Marco. Fra Angelico. This is in Washington, Fra Angelico and Filippo Lippi. I have to say, I find it wonderful that Filippo Lippi was Botticelli's teacher, and Filippo Lippi's son, Filippino Lippi, was Botticelli's student. I just find that such a beautiful, organic, artistic, biographical reality. And there's a room in the National Gallery in London where you can see the picture that that Botticelli painted with Filippino Lippi, the picture that he painted himself, and then the picture which Filippino Lippi painted himself. And they come shortly. in all these pictures, the throng, the crowd, the arrival of the multitude, and the direction that they take, and the position that the artist has chosen to place Mary and the child is what I'm asking you to concentrate on. So this is in the National Gallery, Botticelli and Filippino Lippi. Here's a detail. This is also in the National Gallery. It's Botticelli. You like to see detail. And at once you see that something has changed in the composition. I really embarked on this hoping I could say Leonardo was the first artist who placed Mary and Jesus in the center. But it was Botticelli. This is a more well-known one. I'm sorry, this is a detail of the one we've just looked at. I love these details. You see the monkey down on the right. Sometimes there are camels, leopards. There are no large exotic quadrupeds in the Botticellis, but there's a monkey and there are two dogs. And look at the hands. In each of these figures in this detail, the right hand is engaged in a gesture of some kind. It's quite extraordinary. This is the more well-known Botticelli. It's in the Uffizi. It's more well-known because Botticelli depicted various members of the Medici family in the crowd. That was also the custom at that time. So obviously a ruin. And this is the Filippino Lippi in the National Gallery here in London. So it's not maybe conventional, but still, I'd like to just simply make a space now. Is there an immediate observation that running through this series of pictures, much too quickly, of course, but is there immediately an observation, a fresh observation that someone would like to share? It's ruined, yes. Yes, I mean, why? Yeah, well, I suggested what the sort of conventional explanation would be, that this child that brings a new future into our human civilization is born into a ruined world. And it's not the ruin of nature that we're, of course, so very presently concerned with. It's the architectural ruin, what human beings have done and what has fallen into disrepair. Yes, at one level that's true. At another level, of course, at this time in Florence, some women had considerable influence. But I'm not sure that that political or social reality is what stands behind the quite conscious choice of making the third of these individuals an unmistakable feminine figure. I can't find a copy of it, I'm afraid. And last time I was in Palermo, I wasn't able to take a photograph. But in the National Gallery in Palermo, there's a picture of the Adoration of Magi, where the third of them is not just a black woman, but a black woman whose breast is bared, so that we can be in no doubt about her gender. Does anyone know it? No, back to Palermo. And yes, please, Julia. Yes, and yes, Julia, absolutely. That is an innovative aspect of this. And in all the other pictures, the right hand of the child is engaged in some kind of a blessing. I'll run through them once more. Is engaged in some kind of a blessing, as it is here, but the left hand is quite unmistakably engaged in something else. And look, what is the other hand on the object? It's the right hand of the Magus, and his left hand is on the earth. So his left hand is on the earth, his right hand is offering the gift, the left hand of the child is receiving the gift, and the right hand of the child is blessing. I mean, it is an extraordinary coming together of icons in a way. You'll remember from the Last Supper that the figure at the center of the table has his left hand open in an, not passive, in an expectant gesture, and the right hand of the figure at the center of the table, his hand is engaged, ready to take the sop and give it to Judas. And it's actually an iconographic, a fairly standard iconographic feature, that the right side is the active side. And now careful, that doesn't make the left side passive, it makes it expectant. There's nothing passive in the left hand of Christ in Leonardo's picture. The energy in the waiting is no less than it is in the right hand in the getting ready to take. So Leonardo knows this left and right thing. You also see it in Michelangelo's figure of Christ in what is sometimes called the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. Well, I was particularly interested in the movement. Will it be annoying to go through them again? So there's not so much of a crowd here, but there's certainly a camel, and Mary and the Holy Family with the angels are on the right, and they come from the left and they come to the right. In Lorenzo Monaco, it's the other way around. There's quite a lot of people there. There is a bit of a press, and yet Mary and the child are on the left. In the Annunciation, Mary is almost always on the right and the angel comes from the left. Not always, but almost always. But with the adoration of the Magi, there seems to be a certain freedom. But in all the ones until we get to Botticelli, the movement of the crowd is linear. Mary and the child are either on the left or on the right. Oh, I'm sorry. So here the movement is, of course, wonderfully expressed. We see the Magi 4 times, as I've indicated. And here there is a leopard, there are monkeys, there are birds, there are pseudo-Arabic inscriptions in various places that would be a theme of its own. It's not a stable, it seems to be a house. And there are the welcoming ox and ass as well. But just look at the dynamic between the 3 Magi. One is standing, ready to take off his crown. The other one is bending, taking off his crown. And the third one is kneeling. And look, his crown has been placed on the earth. Again, an unmistakable sense of movement and direction. Look at these 2 figures in their gray-blue. I mean, it's so Masaccio, it's almost Piero. It's so present without any need to show movement, because the significance is in the presence. Not quite sure what Fra Angelico is doing here. What is the building they're in? It seems from people who understand these things that Mary and Jesus are sitting on a camel saddle. Can you see that? And there are horses in the background and people with astrolabes and different instruments and a very stylized rocky landscape. So here the movement is very diverse. Everyone's coming from everywhere, not just following the three magi, but there are people everywhere in the picture coming towards the event. And Mary and the child are on the right. And so there is quite a clear direction here too. In a cave this time, again, very clearly a crowd following in a visible direction. Again, here the architecture here is interesting. It's obviously also a ruin. Behind the house, there's the rocks, and in the background, can you see there's a Tuscan town painted in the background. Also very obviously a ruin. And now with this Botticelli, for the first time, there is no movement, there's no direction and movement in the sense that we've had it before. Mary and the child are in the center, and they are surrounded by people who obviously have moved to get there, but it isn't Botticelli's wish to show us the urgency of the arrival. They have arrived, they are there. And it's painted in such a way that those kneeling in front of the child have their back to us. So we're not part of the event, we're invited to witness what is happening. I don't know what the significance of the peacock is. And here too, Botticelli, this is the one in the Uffizi, Botticelli has placed the mother and child in the center of the picture, but at the back. And again, if there's any movement, it's in the interaction between the people who have already arrived. The movement isn't in the arriving. And this is the one in which the members of the Medici family are identifiable as being part of the scene. The feast of the Magi on the 6th of January was a big event in the Florentine calendar, as I mentioned, and the Medici took advantage of that in various ways, using their own influence to make sure the processions took place from St. Marco to the baptistry first every 3 years, and then I think every year for a while. And it's therefore completely appropriate that the Medici should feature here recognizably in this adoration scene, because that was the reality of the Florentine experience of the Epiphany. And then this Filippino Lippi, which is, as I say, also in the National Gallery. It's very charming, this picture. Mary and the child are in the center, but now it's become linear. And again, there's no sense of the people arriving. The whole thing is that they have arrived. Perhaps you can sense from the way I'm emphasizing this, that I find that an important aspect of the iconography that we'll then look at in connection with the Leonardo. The picture is extraordinary for other reasons. There are all sorts of little things happening in the landscape behind. It looks like Christ is greeting the woman at the well. There is a little depiction of St. Jerome up on the left-hand corner. There are all sorts of little events happening in the landscape that are simply joyful and playful. Obviously, they don't belong to the essential iconography of the Epiphany, but Filipino has enjoyed putting a lot of other things in that must have had a meaning for maybe the patron that it was painted for. There is a little bit of movement in the middle on the right at the back where you see a procession coming, but it isn't really the movement it's not a movement in connection with the adoration of the Magi. So I wanted to let these other images just be present so that the contrast with Leonardo becomes maybe more evident. So even if Saracini is right, and the original conception that Leonardo had was of even more movement, even more people, even more tumultuous chaos around, there's plenty as it is. And I think that's what defines an aspect of this picture. There is so much going on in the middle ground and in the background that seems not to have anything to do with the adoration of the Magi. I find it interesting that the architecture, Leonardo went through different phases. He was going to put the building on the right, then he put it on the left. It was going to have a double set of steps. You can see these in the drawings in the Uffizi and in the Louvre. All sorts of things are happening around the building. There was a camel. Saracini discovered a camel at the bottom of the steps in his spectral exploration of underneath, and they chose not to reveal that. So it's not something you can see now, but you can find descriptions of it. And look how the man to the figure to the right of Mary's left shoulder. Look at this gesture that he has. Did you notice that gesture comes in many of the other pictures? And it's a gesture that is normally associated with the need to screen one's eyes in order to see something that is far away. And yet he couldn't be closer. And in all the other pictures, the tumult and the crowd are part of the urgency of coming to this event. But it's quite clear that the many people who are busy, and the horses and the battle scene that may be happening with the horses in the middle on the right at the back, it's quite clear that these are not immediately connected with the iconography of the adoration of the Magi. So what does it mean that there is this tumultuous chaos of people around? Well, it's almost as if it's an invitation to recognize that it's possible to create a place of stillness and quiet in a tumultuous world. I somehow allow myself to think that as a poet, Kathleen Raine would have understood that. It's possible to find the tranquility required for creativity, even in a crowded and noisy place, if one can but summon up the inner forces for that to be possible. And another aspect of this iconography is not just that these people are crowding in this way, and that the space around Mary and the child has a kind of hallowed protectiveness out of its own, the forces of itself. No one is holding the crowd back. They're pressing in, and yet something prevents them from invading that space. The only one who does is the old Magus that we've already spoken about. But there's another feature of this. In the Botticelli pictures, where Mary and the child are placed at the center, Between us and them, there are other individuals who have their back to us. But Leonardo has painted this in such a way that there is a space for us. We find ourselves in front of this central image. And then it's a question, are we part of the unconscious, tumultuous crowd? Are we part of the crowd that recognizes what it is that people are crowding in to see? Are we here as one of those who has a kind of reverence for this? But the space for us is so unmistakably part of the composition. It's the same in Raphael's Transfiguration. It's painted in such a way that we're invited to step into the picture almost. And I find that very significant here. And I couldn't help somehow thinking when I thought of that, how in this well-known picture by Rembrandt, we're also looking at an event, but the figures in front of us mean that there is no space for us at the table. We're looking at an event, but we're not invited to join in. Whereas in this Rite of Derby in the National Gallery, again, Joseph does something here, which is quite remarkable. There are 10 figures in this picture, 12 if you count the artist and yourself as the onlooker. I like that thought very much. And there's absolutely a space left for us. It's a little bit unnatural to think that these 10 people would have sat round the table and left a space. Just as it's unnatural to think that 13 gentlemen having a last supper would all sit on just one side of the table. That was the iconography. Joseph Wright of Derby doesn't have to adhere to any conventions here, but he has left a space for us. And I feel we can also reflect on this event. So I wanted to bring that because I think it's another artist who understands the significance of making a space for the beholder. So we're challenged to be involved. And I think that's one of the interesting features of this Renaissance time. We're challenged to be involved and invited somehow to be involved. Leonardo just did the sketch and the preparation, and then he left for Milan. There are at least 2 other pictures that he started and didn't finish. And I was sharing with Julia earlier this evening my thought that I think the composition was the great challenge for Leonardo. And when he had arrived at the structure of the whole work compositionally, he felt he had done the important task. And then putting the pigment on, well, of course, it would have been a wonderful picture. We know what Leonardo was able to do with paint. But I dare to say that the greatness of this picture already is there for us in the way in which the composition is achieved. And for Leonardo, now painting applying the pigment would have been not a challenge anymore. So he's off to Milan. You will know this picture of St. Jerome in the Vatican, obviously unfinished. Again, here too, Leonardo's composition departs from all the traditional iconography. So often we see Jerome sitting in his study with a lion peacefully at his feet while he's translating the Bible, or praying in front of the crucifix in the desert, and the lion there simply indicating the relationship between the man and the beast. But what does Leonardo do here? It does something totally different. And the way in which the lion is looking at Jerome to see whether or not Jerome will be true to his vows. In his right hand, Jerome holds a stone, because the tradition is that when he was tempted by impure thoughts, he would take a stone and beat his breast. So Leonardo doesn't show us that. Doesn't show us the hand here with the stone. So many artists do. What does he show? He shows the hand outstretched, and we know that that's the getting ready to do this, and the lion is in readiness to watch. I feel so strongly that when Leonardo had arrived at this drama of the composition, it was finished for him. He'd done the thing that was a real challenge for him. This is a new picture of me. I've never been to the museum in Parma. Perhaps you know it. It's also regarded as one of the unfinished pictures by Leonardo. An extraordinary contrast between the quiet delicacy of the face, the wildness of the hair. Is there someone here who speaks Italian? La scapigliata, the woman with the disheveled hair. It's one word in Italian, scapigliata. Is it legitimate to discern in this drawing something that belongs to what I've been trying to say about the adoration of the Magi? Look at the quiet dignity and beauty of her face. Wah! And all that going on around her. I'm not suggesting for a moment that that's a conscious thing that Leonardo was doing, but somewhere it struck me very much. That in this tumult, there can be a reverence for something still and beautiful. So how do we stand in front of this picture? May we just look at 3 again, please? I want to show you the relationship between the magus who is kneeling and the child. So can you see his left hand is on the ground and his right hand is somehow tickling the feet of the child. The crown and the left hand are on the earth. The right hand is also in relationship to the foot of the child. Well, we've already explored how that manifests here. The left hand of the old man is on the earth, and the right hand is offering, with this right active hand, the gift. And the left hand of the child is accepting, receiving the gift. The right hand of the child is blessing the old man. So I don't know which of the 3 this is and which gift this is. Is it myrrh, frankincense, or gold? I'm going to go with gold and expand the following idea. Before the Big Bang, the sun and all the other planets were part of the Earth. Venus left copper in the earth. The moon left silver in the earth. Mars left iron, and so on. And the sun left gold. So can we imagine that this old man with his left hand on the earth is showing where the gold of his gift comes from? He didn't mine the gold, but he knows that this is old sun substance. And it's not a lump of golden ore. It's a beautifully worked, elaborated, artistically crafted item. Something of the old sun substance has been made into a thing of beauty that is being offered to the child, who is the being that will be in the service of the new sun being coming to the earth. I see this as the old gold being offered to the new sun being, who's receiving it with his left hand and giving a blessing with his right hand. This gesture is also something that you may be familiar with from both versions of the Madonna of the Rocks, the one in the National Gallery and the one in Paris. If you can just inwardly imagine it, there's a child that is slightly higher and a child that is slightly lower. And the higher child has the gesture of prayer, and the lower child has the gesture of blessing. I don't want to say it should be the other way around, It is that way round, because there precisely is the active dynamic, the balance. The one above is in a gesture of reverence, and one below is in a gesture of blessing. This is where Leonardo's genius becomes immediately unmistakable. And to have recognized how this I'm grateful that I can see how this left-right dynamic plays into the central motive of this picture. So Origen speaks about gold, frankincense, and myrrh in the following way. He describes gold is fit for a king, frankincense is fit for a god, and the myrrh belongs to this God who took on mortality to experience death. If we stand in front of this picture, is it legitimate to ask, what is the gift that we bring? We've got a front row seat here. We've been given the chance to come as close as we dare or want to. What is the gift that we bring to this? I'm also interested in the fact that it's unfinished from another point of view. So we know it's unfinished because Leonardo went to Milan. We don't know why he decided not to finish this. That would be speculative. But what is the significance of something that is unfinished? If you think of Chrétien de Troyes' story of Perceval, it ends abruptly in the middle of a sentence. Raphael's Transfiguration, the last picture he painted, he dies before he finishes it. Michelangelo's slaves are left unfinished on purpose, I would contend. But the second, third, and fourth Pietas are all unfinished in a way that I think Michelangelo did not intend, but actually which deeply belongs beyond his conscious intentions to these works of art. Mozart's Requiem and in Bach's Art of the Fugue. So these last three, Michelangelo's fourth Pietà, Bach's Art of the Fugue and Mozart's Requiem, these works are left unfinished because the artist dies before they can be finished. And I don't know what I would say about Mozart and Bach, but I'm quite sure that if you ask Michelangelo in his 80s, do you want to finish this before you die? He would have said, yes, of course I want to finish it. What a stupid question. How can you ask me that? The reality of the destiny was he could not. And if you're familiar with this sculpture, you will know that part of the glory of it is that it is work in progress and is not finished. And if we dare to imagine what it must be like for the artist at death to experience, I cannot finish this because I'm going to die before I have been able to finish it. And then, if you will allow the imagination, on the other side of the threshold of earthly death, which we can think of as spiritual rebirth, what a glorious understanding of the greater truth, the individuality who was the artist. What a glorious understanding of the greater truth, that of course everything on earth is inevitably always unfinished. There is always more to do. And when we think we've done something, it's a comforting illusion maybe, but the reality is there is more to do. And it seems to me that works of art that are left unfinished carry that with a potentized intensity that an apparently finished work might not so easily mediate to us, or to the artist who experiences on earth, I can't finish this. And what sort of an experience then awaits the artist on the other side? So this unfinishedness here in this picture, it attests to not an event that happened in Bethlehem 2000 years ago, but an ever-present eternal reality. I think that also lives in the composition and in the way in which the artist allows us to find our own relationship to it. The space is left free for us. whether we fill it with reverence or curiosity or indifference, there we are left free. But the space is an invitation for us to find our own relationship to what is happening here. And in this encounter between old and young, it's also a way of representing what is always also true, the encounter of the past and the future. We're always at that moment where the past meets the future. In a way, the present is ever present, but it has no dimension. It's like you remember the traditional geometrical definition of a line. It has length, but no breadth, just as a point has place, but no dimension. Do you remember this from school days in geometry? So the line where past and future meet is eternally where we are. We're never anywhere else. We're always on that line. It cannot be measured. I mean, you say today is the present. Most of it's in the past and a bit of it's still in the future. So in grammar, the present has another significance. But in life, presence of mind, presence being present, is an eternal experience. And I find Leonardo invites that recognition here as well. Well, it's been my good fortune to work with Renaissance art also in Asia. And that's also a challenge because one doesn't want to go there talking about the Christian narrative or necessarily the Christian cultural context in which the picture arises and in which it has its place in Europe. And Leonardo, and of course also Raphael and Michelangelo, but let's talk about Leonardo. Leonardo's pictures particularly allow one to affirm the universally human that is not a denial of the Christian context in any way, but the universally human that shines through this work does not depend at all on knowing or acknowledging the biblical narrative or even the Christian context. And that's not to deny either of those, as I think must be obvious to you, are very dear to me. But it becomes also very dear to me to recognize that in this Renaissance art, there is the capacity to celebrate what is universally human and transcends not just the time and place of its creation, but also the cultural context out of which it arose. And another aspect of Renaissance art, and I indicated this in the introduction to my lecture this evening, is that even those works of art which are finished, shall we say by Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo, even those which are finished, actually they may be finished, but they're incomplete until we become co-creative with the artist in the way in which we relate to them. So much of medieval art invites reverence and respect and awe, if you like. But when we come into the Renaissance, I particularly feel that this art is saying, and what are you going to do? This art is somehow saying, this picture, this art, is an invitation for you to become involved. And I'm thinking particularly, for example, of the Stanza della Segnatura in the Vatican, where Raphael paints these two famous pictures that are known as the Disputa and the School of Athens. And it's glorious because they're frescoes. Now, modern technology allows you to put a copy of one next to the copy of the other. But if you want to experience that room with a kind of artistic integrity, you go in there and you look at the School of Athens, and then you look at the Disputa. And in order to make the relationship between these two, you have to be active, not just in your thinking, but actually physically. And it's extraordinary what arises then. I don't want to go on now and say more about that, but it becomes so clear that however great and amazing each of these pictures is in its own right, when you bring them, when I, as the active participant, not just the beholder, but the beholder who is active between these pictures, then another dimension opens up, and the significance of both of these works of art becomes something much greater, because you have accepted the invitation to be active in their presence and not just gratefully, I don't want to say passive, gratefully observant. It has to start with observing. But the pictures actually invite us in the Renaissance to go one step further. It's the same with the Sistine Chapel. He painted the ceiling when he was in his 30s, and then he paints the altar wall when he's in his 60s. But actually, it's only when you take the role that the priest has at that altar, and I think it's only the Pope that is allowed to celebrate Mass there. When you understand the dynamic that the Pope at the altar experiences in relationship to what takes place horizontally above, vertically on the wall, which is mistakenly known as a last judgment, what happens at the altar, and the way in which the priest then turns round and horizontally, socially makes possible something that has been part of the totality. But it's only when the priest at the altar is active in giving communion that the meaning of all that opens up at another dimension. And it's quite clear Michelangelo did not know that. I hope it's all right to say that. Even great artists can be the instruments for more than they themselves are conscious of. So his destiny at 30 is to paint the ceiling the other way around. He doesn't paint it that way. He paints that way, backwards. He ends with God above the altar. 30 years later, his destiny brings him, this is supposed to be a lecture about Leonardo, I'm sorry. 30 years later, his destiny brings him to paint the altar wall. And the whole thing now has totally different movement. It only becomes discernible when we are active in the presence of this art. Well, Leonardo's, it's gently indicating I should come to an end, Stephen. Yes, thank you for the gentleness of this. Leonardo's Annunciation and Leonardo's Last Supper are no less inviting for us to participate. And I think that is the signature that interests me most in this Renaissance art. It's not a rebirth of Greek and Roman culture. Of course, at one level it is, but that's not the interesting birth. The birth there is of a gesture in the realm of the arts that invites us or even challenges us to become co-creative with the artists so that an altogether new dimension arises. And Ian, because you mentioned Shakespeare at the beginning, 100 years later, when the Renaissance manifests in the Anglo-Saxon language here, in the Anglo-Saxon drama tradition, in Shakespeare's last play, The Tempest, the whole meaning of what happens there, you could say the meaning of everything that Shakespeare does until that moment does not depend on what Shakespeare writes. It does not depend on what the actor playing Prospero does. It depends on how we respond to what Prospero asks of us right at the end of that play. I think I've come to the end. Thank you.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much.